Pictures tell stories. It doesn't really matter if it's a selfie or if it's a portrait that somebody is taking of another person. You are sharing in that human moment.
Let's take a picture of you two. 1, 2, 3. No, he's too dark.
So this is where the discussion started.
Here, just use my phone. It's got a better sensor.
A better sensor? What does that even mean?
Color tuning is an extremely complicated process. When we look at images, what we try to do is figure out how much of a difference there is between, let's say, a reference image and the image that we actually are trying to quantify. We were running some tests on a product, and it was the proximity sensor we were testing. And we said, oh, it looks like it does 60 centimeters. And we looked at each other and go, we're both white. The technology itself, as many people will say, is not racist. It's just that it wasn't tested properly to make sure that the designers weren't unconsciously biased. Hey, there's an entire world out there and we want to make sure this works for everybody. I love the fact that we get to influence cameras, that we get to share those experiences of life and emotion. And to me, that is what imaging is about. It is a vehicle to express humanity.
Take a picture of you two. 1, 2, 3.
So, excellent afternoon, everyone, and welcome to my living room in Meilahti, Helsinki. Before I go any further, I'd like to really thank Inclusive for their hard work. It means so much to me and Google to be invited and to be part of this event. The reason why I wanted to show this video and why I also love it is because it's a perfect metaphor of why we are here today, as well as the challenge that we are facing. It shows how our own biases and beliefs becomes the cameras through which the mind then takes snapshots of the world. As said, technology itself is not a racist. It's just that the designers were not screened for their unconscious biases. And as women in tech, we're for sure too well aware about these design flaws in our society. So let me allow me to introduce myself now. My name is Yacine Samb. I'm a leader at Google. I'm a growth marketing manager for Northern Europe. I'm Black. I'm Finnish Senegalese by nationality, born and raised in Ivory Coast. I'm a woman. And finally, I am honored and excited to be able to speak with you today. In many ways, I find that my identity is an illustration of intersectionality, and my life experiences are an embodiment of both the heights of privilege, but also the lows of discrimination. It is also what has led me to my position driving racial equity and diversity, equity, and inclusion overall at Google in Northern Europe and beyond, a role that I can now devote 50% of my time officially. So let's dive into the content. Next slide, please. Diversity and inclusion matters more than ever now, as already mentioned in the beautiful opening words. In a chaotic year marked by the crisis of racial injustice, as well as the uncertainties of COVID-19, the choices that companies and organizations make today concerning equity have a huge impact on the future. As women in tech, as leaders, as role models, we have the power and the responsibility to make the change also happen. We need to rebuild an inclusive digital economy that supports women and other underrepresented groups. In my view, these are the 3 pillars that we'll cover today that will help us get there. Firstly, we'll talk about data-driven diversity and equity, how to start from transparency and using data to inform decisions. Secondly, we'll touch upon the topic of digital transformation and the role it can play for a more inclusive economy. And finally, I really want to finish with the topic of allyship and ourselves being better role models and using the community of women that we also have around us today. Next slide, please. At Google, this is how we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm going to use the abbreviation of DEI, so diversity, equity, and inclusion. Firstly, to really believe in what diversity can achieve means understanding that people are an investment. It's about how we can attract, develop, progress, and retain more underrepresented talents at all levels of the organization. Secondly, delivering a fair framework of fairness means that we need to future-proof all our own processes. That is what equity is about. And then finally, creating a culture of inclusivity means valuing everyone for who they are as individuals and where they want to go in their careers. Next slide, please. Before I go into the beef of data-driven diversity, equity, and inclusion, let's acknowledge the challenge we still face. Here are the numbers that still don't add up and make for depressive reading as well. When we add to this that only 17% of women are still in STEM roles are in Europe, on top of the general lack of career progression in the industry, it's no wonder that we have so many stories of women leaving too early on their tech career. This shows that we still have work to do. And when we go forward on the next slide, please, with this in mind, here is the case that we need to be working for, now even louder and longer than ever. There is no denying that one, diversity breeds innovation and creativity, as already mentioned before today. And secondly, gender diverse leadership teams outperform those that are not. So doing good is good for business. A more diverse technical society means equal opportunities to succeed. And this is something that we take at Google very seriously. Equality means really equity, which means really, in this case, closing the pay gap and putting more women in leadership roles. Next slide, please. At Google, we approach DEI as we would approach any other business case. We set clear objectives, key results, clear goals. We create dedicated, expert, and well-resourced teams. We create a strategy and put initiatives into action. And we review and track the progress regularly with the leadership team. Everything we do is driven by data, and these are the KPIs we pay most attention to. The end goal is obviously to increase representation, but in order to achieve a greater representation, we must go deeper into the numbers of hiring and attrition as well. So looking at this particular graph from our diversity report from last year that we published officially since 2014, it's clear that we still have a long way to go. And I want to be very humble presenting our numbers as well. So you can see that nearly 1 out of 3 of current Googlers worldwide are women. And unfortunately, this proportionate balance is also mirrored in our rate for new hires. Secondly, the attrition rate for women globally is 13%, which is much lower than the retention of male employees. The only silver lining here is that there is a positive retention rate for the Europe, Middle East, and EMEA region versus the global data. And then finally, representation of women at leadership levels was over 25% globally. So still a long way to go ahead. Next slide, please. Now moving on to the topic of enabling digital transformation to build inclusive economies. In order to improve hiring and retention, we must find a way to both diversify the talent pool, but at the same time create a magnetic working culture in our organizations and in our companies. And the answer lies in empowering digital transformation and the intersectoral collaboration, for example, in Finland, that is required to jointly make sure that no one is left behind. Turning to our data center friends in Hamina, the 1.2 million cumulative investment is a great example of how we can expose more people to the world of tech and also cascade the impact of this significant digital asset. And while the data center acknowledges the limitations of the available talent pool also in their industry, they have not only brought significant amounts of jobs in Finland and job opportunities, but the investment has also led to interesting collaborations, for instance, with the Ekami Educational Institute. So among other things, the institute facilitates rehabilitation of educationally marginalized groups while also piloting technology playground for future jobs projects. And what is important here is that the first program supports those lacking the privilege of access, while the second offers innovative and inspiring ways to inspire tech-curious individuals. Next slide, please. Like the regional projects in Hamina, Google recognizes its responsibility to do more globally, to open up the digital economy to all. And this is where I would also, everyone here in the audience, encourage you to look into your organizations. Where can you go further? COVID has really shaken the world at its core, with its true effects to be seen, still realized. And what is certain, though, is that people from underrepresented groups and minorities, like women, are disproportionately impacted. So we must also help them recover. How I see it, to make the digital economy truly democratic, it requires a two-step approach. With one hand, we must provide the tools that are accessible for everyone, while on the other hand, we must certainly expand opportunities for underrepresented groups to learn how to use them. During my activities at Google, some notable activities that we have tried and where we have experimented that have included, for example, the I Am Remarkable trainings, which is a Google initiative empowering women and underrepresented groups to communicate and celebrate their achievements in the workplace and beyond. And secondly, taking a more macro perspective, economic perspective, with our Grow with Google program in Finland, we also work with the Federation of Finnish Enterprises to support entrepreneurs with a migrant background. Next slide, please. For digital transformation to include minorities in an organizational context, we need to create the conditions for organizations and teams to perform at their best. This is critical. This is where you should think about psychological safety, dependability on team members, structure, clarity. People feel that they are making an impact and the work is meaningful. Secondly, we need to enable collaboration and access to information. Access to information in terms of transparency for everyone and everywhere. And finally, we need to be deliberate and persistent about the organizational culture that is needed to succeed. Next slide, please. So moving on the very final topic of allyship and being a role model. Change can't happen without each of us actively raising the voice of others and amplifying and advocating for others. It is critical to force a change in the culture that blocks the perception of who the tech industry is really for. So this is where everyone has a role to play. And the blueprint for that is exactly allyship, working for justice through the lens of your own advantage group membership, to avoid this process to become performative or something that people start to execute. I can encourage allies to follow this three-step stage of approach of acknowledge, educate, and take action. Whether this is an individual or an organizational exercise, these stages are equally important. So in terms of acknowledging, if you haven't truly acknowledged the privilege of where you are, you cannot hope to be genuinely self-reflective. So you need to onboard to an educational journey. Without a deep and wide search for insights and understanding, the actions that you might take might become superficial or even detrimental to your own intentions. So thus, start thinking about how can you diversify your own life. What kind of leaders do you follow on social media? What kind of podcasts do you listen? Who is the most senior Black person you have worked with? Are you actively making an effort to understand voices that have been silenced? Ask yourself a few questions that understand you, how diversified your own life is. And then know that you don't know what you don't know. So educate yourself and be able to enter the quality discussions where you can raise the voice of the community, but also the voice of others. Let's go to the final slide. Before I finish my keynote, I want to personally recognize how privileged my professional position as Google has been, particularly during these very uncertain times. However, I also recognize that as an intersectoral role model, there is a community out there that needs me to support as an ally. There is no time to waste to create a culture of belonging across lines of difference. And whether it is for driving better profit for a company or building a more inclusive economy where no one is left before, we need to drive the change individually and through our organizations to actively amplify and advocate for others. As women in tech, we have the opportunity to not only inspire others, but also to change the design of our societies by changing perspectives and affecting the perceptions of those who shape the future. This is a great responsibility, but it's also an exciting opportunity. And finally, I hope that we all change the lens through which we see our world. Thank you.
Thank you, Yacine, for a great presentation. You mentioned a lot about role models and also the importance of having a diverse role models. But I would like to ask you, who has been your sort of role model throughout your career, and perhaps also even you entered the tech sphere in the early days of your career?
Oh, thank you for asking the question. I think the important point is that there are different kinds of role models during your career. So obviously, I'm looking at people who look like me. It's obvious to say, for example, Michelle Obama or Rosa Parks, or people who have made really some kind of change. But the interesting thing is that lately, actually, after discovering my passions on top of the work that I'm doing, Martti Ahtisaari, in terms of negotiating peace in 3 different continents, a Nobel Prize winner, has become a really big role model and inspiration to me, in terms of also being the voice for diversity and bridge for cooperation.
Great. Thank you so much for being here today with us at the forum, and I'm wishing you a great evening as well. Thank you so much, Yacine, for joining us.
Thank you so much again, and I will be privileged to continue watching the session.
Please do so. See ya. All right, let's move on to the next program. According to research, more women are leaving the tech industry, and the numbers of women represented in tech are not looking too great either. Only 3% of females says that a career in technology would be their first choice. Only 17% of ICT specialists are women. And 93% of all the capital invested in tech companies are going to all male teams. Next, our panel discussion will focus on how to retain women in the tech industry by making the tech culture more inclusive. Joining us for the session, we have Thomas Nyström, Country Manager and Director of Accenture Finland, Ekaterina Gianelli, Partner at Inventure, Anna-Maria Henel, CEO at DCR, and Elina Lappalainen from Talouselämä moderating the discussion. Welcome on stage. The stage is yours.